Set. All right. Hello and welcome back to the Gomer's YouTube channel. It has been a while since we have gotten together to bring you some new wines or new spirits and new beers that we profile in the store, or feature in the store rather. Today we're going to do some Italian wines. Once again, I'm joined by my good friend Rich Zellich with Pinnacle Imports here in Kansas City. And we are not in the store. We are not in the Parker McDonough wine room there at Gomer's in Parkville. We are at Shea 73rd, otherwise known as my kitchen.
So, Pat, this is anyway. Thank you for having me over to your house today. This is great.
You're welcome. You are welcome. So, with the way things are at the store, the wine room has still kind of become a warehouse of sorts for right now. So, we thought it might be better to get out of the store and get to some place that's not as hectic and a little bit more conducive to drinking wine and having a little bite to eat. So,
plus,
welcome.
Mondays are Pat's a day off. He goes into the store anyway, and now he's doing more work because Pat doesn't understand what the words "day off" actually mean. But he was nice enough to host us here this morning, and he went and got some snacks to go with the Sicilian wines, which is going to be really cool. So, yeah, Pat, thank you very much for
you're welcome.
us here.
You are welcome. So, Sicily.
Yeah, so we're going to do Italy sort of in three parts. And historically, if you were talking about Italy, the two places that would be really significant would be Tuscany and Piedmont. The Veneto is obviously very significant. Alto Adige is. All these regions, they're all important. There are 20 regions basically in Italy, and they're all important, and they all make really beautiful and distinct wines. And we're going to get to Tuscany, and we're going to get to Piedmont, but I wanted to start in kind of one of my favorite areas right now, which is Sicily, and specifically Mount Etna within Sicily. And for me, this is one of the most interesting growing regions in the world. It's certainly one of the most extreme growing regions in the world. It was last year there was an eruption at Mount Etna. This is an active volcano. So you're doing viticulture basically on three sides, the north, south, and east side, sort of this backward C shape for the appellation. But this is an active volcano. It is I believe, the most active volcano in Europe. It's a very tall mountain. It is the tallest mountain aside from the Alps in Italy. So this is pretty extreme viticulture here. So it's not just that you've got this volcano, which makes things a little bit of a challenge. You're talking about vineyards that are terraced. They are on the side of this steep mountain, and you can't really farm with a tractor on these narrow terraces. So to make wine there is really a labor of love. Now, this is an ancient growing region, but it was kind of forgotten about for a really long time. And actually, Mount Etna didn't become a DOC until just before I was born, actually. It was created as a DOC in Italy in 1968, August of 1968. But there's some pretty significant things to the terroir here. I want to talk about sort of the general terroir of Etna, and then we're going to kind of dive down a little bit more into that. So when you're talking about where you are in terms of the world, so Sicily is basically off the coast of Africa, and you've got that kind of heat, that kind of really warm temperature. There's a big diurnal shift between day to night, and crucially, you have high elevation, usually 3,500 feet elevation or higher, and that helps cool things off. And then you've also got the influence of the wind coming in off the ocean. So that kind of mitigates some of that heat during those really hot summers. The top soil, for want of a better word, is basically volcanic ash. But what's underneath there really varies. So when you have an eruption, it's not just lava comes out the top. There's all these upheavals of the earth underneath that. So you get these really unique sort of these little patches of terroir, these essentially little vineyards. And for a long time, people didn't really explore those separately very much. They just kind of made wines that were wines from Etna and blended them all together.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, you alluded to the hot and the dry conditions are almost ideal for the arid and conditions and the dry conditions. I mean, there's no risk of or less risk for rot and spoilage of the grapes and then the vineyards and all that, and really consistent climate.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got the diurnal shifts, you know, the heat and the cool evenings and all that, but you can pretty much bank on, hey, this is the growing season, and
Right.
you know, unless we have Etna erupting or something like that, then I mean, it is a very, very consistent growing area, which is fantastic and has been for hundreds of years.
Well, yeah, you and I were talking about that a little beforehand. So obviously, like I said, this is an ancient growing region, but going back to the Greeks, right?
The Greeks and the Phoenicians and Arabs and obviously Italians. You know, the Greeks brought all their advanced farming methods to the area, and then obviously Italy took that and kind of expanded on it and put in the new vineyards and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of history to this area. You know, there's lots of customers, wine customers that come in the store, and they go to Italy and they go to Sicily and they come back with all sorts of stories. Did you know this? Did you know that? It's like, oh my gosh! And it seems like everybody comes back with a little bit different tidbit of history. So over time, you kind of learn a lot about that area.
No, that's pretty
cool.
Well, it's interesting for me because when I first started with Pinnacle nearly 20 years ago now, I spent about a year in St. Louis and we carried wines from Mount Etna. I used to tell people we sold wines from Mount Etna, but at the time it was really hard to sell wines from Etna. Now it's kind of this really popular area, not just for consumers, but there's kind of this land rush now on Etna. Everybody is rushing to buy vineyard land, which is kind of where we come in here. So the wines we're going to try today are actually all from one producer. I carry wines from different producers in Etna, and I love all of them, but the wines from Tenuta della Terre Nere these guys are really kind of the benchmark, I think, for Mount Etna right now. And Terre Nere was started by a guy named Marco de Grazia, and he had a great Italian importing company, Marco de Grazia Imports. I used to run an Italian restaurant in St. Louis called I Fratellini, and about 50% of my wine list was probably from de Grazia because it was such a great book. Well, he was one of the early people to really kind of focus on Etna again in the modern era, and when he decided he wasn't going to be an importer anymore, he went and bought a bunch of land in Sicily. And what he decided was he didn't want to just make blended Etna wines. We're going to try an Etna Bianco, which is from all over the place in Etna, and an Etna Rosso, but then we're also going to have one of his single cru wines. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But he was really the first guy, not just in the modern era, to really refocus on there, but to start breaking these things down parcel by parcel. So it's pretty cool. The guy who owns my company, Bill Neep, has this knack for finding wines that they're just getting ready to become a big deal. And we got the wines in the warehouse, and about a month later, Wine Spectator came out with a list of their top wines from Sicily, and 3 of the top 5 were from Terre Nere.
Wow.
One of their wines was Wine Spectator number 3 or 5 or something that same year in their list of their top 100 wines of the year. So really a benchmark winery, not an ancient winery, but made by a guy who really had the understanding of what that land was about. He worked with producers from there and knew where the best crus were, and there you go. That's how it started. So let's get into the first wine a little bit. And just a little note, we're doing something a little bit different. You may be watching this video well after the fact, but Pat and I are recording this the same week that we're actually going to send out an email kind of featuring each of these 3 wines with some more detail. There's some press notes on there. 92 points for that Nabiolo, 94 for the Rosso, 96 for the Santo Spirito, if people care about those. But Pat and I wanted to be able to just kind of have this video as well, so we could taste these together, talk about them a little bit. You may not ever meet Robert Parker or any of those guys, but you might have met me and Pat.
You meet us.
Yeah, so maybe you'll kind of find out what our palates are and see if they jive with yours. But let's go ahead and get into the nose on the Etna Bianco. So we're going to do 2019 on the Bianco and Rosso, and then we're going to go with a little older vintage on the cru wine. So this is 2019. The 20 should land anytime now. I love the nose on these wines. They're really not like anything else in the world. They're not. I mean, it's Italian for sure, but this doesn't smell like Pinot Grigio or Piano or Falangina, and it kind of almost has a white Burgundy thing to it, but it's a little more saline. And the texture, just the richness on the nose, I think is a little bit different.
Yep. When I first do the nose, I do get that. I'm like, oh, this is a white Burgundy. But then the more you pay attention, it's like, no, there's not. There's a lot more other notes and floral notes and apricot and pear and stuff that you wouldn't get in a white Burgundy that you're going to get in this blend.
That's delicious. This is one of my favorite wines for summer. Now, having said that, I think it's 57 degrees outside and it's raining and it's windy, but there's enough weight here as well that you could do this for a fall white. I'm always kind of looking for wines that are a little bigger and richer that aren't oaky, buttery Chardonnays for people. And if you like big, oaky, buttery Chardonnay, that's great, no problem. There's lots of those to go around. But a lot of people want something bigger who aren't necessarily fans of that. So, I mean, this is the kind of wine that you can do with Thanksgiving that's going to be a little different than a Chardonnay or a Riesling or a Gewürztraminer or anything like that, but still go really, really well. The genesis of this wine, I think, is kind of interesting. So, with Etna Reds, you're allowed to blend a little bit of white wine grapes, I think up to 5%. And what Mark Grazia wanted to do basically is get the whites out of his reds completely. He only wanted them to be Nerello Mascalese, and full Nerello Cappuccio as well. So he basically blended all the whites that were there together to make this wine. And went, let's see if it works. Yeah, as it turns out, it works.
I think it works really well.
Yeah, so you're roughly 65%, I think. Yeah, 65% Caricante with Cacciarato, Graconico, Inzolia, kind of a little kitchen sink kind of wine here. But this is a good example of, I think, the whole being more than the sum of its parts. There's just a harmony in this wine that nothing tastes disjointed. I'm not going, well, there's the Graconico, there's the Caricante. This is a very harmonious wine. Medium-bodied, I'd say.
Medium-bodied.
It's got great acidity, so there's lots of lift to this wine, but it is a little bigger. It's a little richer wine.
Yep. You mentioned all the names of those grapes, folks. Haven't heard a single one of them. I mean, it's not Chardonnay, it's not Pinot Grigio, Sauv Blanc, or any of that. So I think of any area of the world where I think honestly that Italy can be very intimidating because there are so many great varieties. I mean, there's over, what is it, I read something a few weeks ago, like 330 or 350 grape varieties that are authorized,
right?
You know, that they can actually call it that, but then there's over 500 other great varieties that they go, oh, what is this? Oh, we don't know, let's just put that in the blend. And I think it makes it really difficult to go, oh, you know when it's in a white Burgundy, you know what's in a lot of white blends that come out of California, Oregon, or Washington, but with Italy, it does, because there are so many, I think it does make it intimidating.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. We used to say there were over 2,000 grape varieties in Italy, but a lot of those things are the same grape, going by a different name in different parts of Italy, and they have figured out that some things that they thought were different are the same thing. But yeah, Italy is tough not just because of the amount of grapes, but some regions label their wine by the region. Some regions name their wine by the name of the grape, and then you have all kinds of things that are just fanciful names. You have DOCs, you have DOCGs, you have IGTs, you have all these different sort of classifications of wines, and it can be intimidating if you're looking at this from a perspective of, like Pat and I were going to give you a test on this. But I'd like people to look at this a different way. Instead of that, here's 350 or 500 opportunities to try something really cool and beautiful. And you don't have to know that a white Etna has to be at least 60% Caricante. That doesn't really matter. Having said that, these grapes to me are really interesting because you don't see these even in other parts of Italy. I mean, these are Sicilian things. I know you had talked a little bit. We were going to do a different wine earlier, and you were talking a little bit about Nero d'Avola and its characteristics. And those tend to be sort of sturdier, more darkly fruited wines, where the Nerellos I think are a little bit different. But Nero d'Avola, that's another one of those grapes that really you'll see in this region and kind of nowhere else. And to me, that's really charming. Again, I'll go back to Chardonnay. I don't mean to pick on Chardonnay. I love really good Chardonnay. But I've had it, and you've had it, and probably everybody watching this has had it. And that's cool. It's nice to visit with an old friend. It's also nice to make some new friends. So I hope this becomes your new friend.
Yep, agreed.
I'm going to drink this. I'm not spitting or anything. No. I'm drinking this.
And people that come in the store and we get engaged in talking about wine and like, oh, I like this and I like, so what do you like and this, and we talk about that. But I invariably tell everybody at the end of the day, it's just drink what you like, and it doesn't matter what it costs, doesn't matter what the grapes are in it, doesn't matter if you can't pronounce the name of the grapes. I can't pronounce the name of a bunch of these things that we're going to talk about. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Do you like the wine, and is it good, and can you sit down with a friend and enjoy it? And that's what it's all about.
Now, see, this is one of the places where you guys benefit as consumers. You don't necessarily have to remember all the things that Pat and I have to remember. I spent more time than I would care to admit practicing saying the word of a name of a Greek grape, Apricot. That doesn't exactly roll off my tongue, but we're going to do a video on some Greek wines as well, so I better keep practicing. Apricot. But for now, we're in Sicily, and these are more fun and easy.
All right.
So we did the Blanco, just from Etna, and again, that's from a blend of things, not just the blend of grapes, but a blend of fruit from areas all over Etna. The Rosso is sort of the same thing, and we pre-poured these in our glasses. They've just sort of been in the glasses for 5 or 10 minutes, just to give them a chance to open up a little bit. This is a young wine, again, 2019 vintage on both these guys. The interesting thing for me about the Rosso and the Blanco is, because these are the wines that he makes the most of, these are kind of the calling cards for what he does. This is probably where you will be introduced to Terre Nere. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it's his best wine, although I think it's lovely, but it's the wine that most people are going to try. And there are sort of two schools of thoughts that I seem to see wineries doing. One is either, this is our cheap wine, we don't have to put that much care into it, or two, this is where most people are going to discover us, we better make a really good wine. And Martin Grazia absolutely does the latter here. This is a very beautiful wine. For Etna Rossos, it's pretty specific in what you can use. The wines have to be based on Nerello Mascalese, like a huge percent, like 90 or 95% or something, has to be Nerello Mascalese. Forgive me, I don't remember the exact percentage. And then Nerello Cappuccio is the other grape that you tend to see here. These are both of the same family. We talk sometimes about about clones and things like that of grapes. There are grapes that have sort of families, like Muscat's a great example. There's orange Muscat, there's yellow Muscat, there's all these variations. Nerello is a type of grape, but there's variations. So Nerello Mascalese and Cappuccio here. This is an interesting wine for me for a couple of reasons. The first is, with the white, I can go, oh, this sort of has elements of something. You can tell it's Italian. There's just something distinctly Italian about it, and it has that kind of white burgundy thing. Mm-hmm. When I put my nose up to this, I smell flowers, just like right off the bat, and it makes me think, okay, cool, we're going to have Burgundy. And I love Burgundy. Mm-hmm. I can't afford to drink red Burgundy most of the time anymore because the prices have gotten so crazy. The price on this is pretty dynamite. I don't think I have, I'm trying to think if I have anybody's Bourgogne Rouge, just basic red Burgundy, that's a lower price than this. I might have one. Mm-hmm. It's maybe 27 on the shelves, maybe. But just a really great price for something that I think has that elegance. I'm talking with my nose in my mouth. That's got to be an interesting video. It has that elegance and that nuance that I really prize with great old world Pinot Noir. And when we talk old world, we're basically talking Italy and France. So there's some sense to this. One of the things that I think we should really talk maybe a little more about is how to use these wines. These are lovely to drink by themselves, but as I mentioned earlier, Pat did go to the store and he bought some snacks for us, which was very nice. Thank you, Pat.
You're welcome.
But these wines are really made to go with food. Most French wines are, most Italian wines are. They're just made with a different mindset. They're made with the mindset of you're going to have food with these. So, acidity is really key. And typically when you're talking about old world wines, what you're talking about is wines with a little lower alcohol content, a little higher acidity, and wines that aren't necessarily all about their fruit, the way a lot of New World wines can be. A big Napa Cabernet or Merlot or an Australian Shiraz from the Barossa Valley where it's really warm, that can just be all about the fruit. As Old World wines, there's more going on than that, more nuance. And I think that's really fascinating. So on the nose, I'm like, oh, hey, this smells like this is going to be a nice Bourgogne, maybe a Sauvignon Lebon or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you taste it, and it's a completely different
it's way
animal.
different. It's way different. It almost throws your senses a curveball when on the nose you're like, oh, that's Pinot Noir, and then you taste it, you're like, oh no, this is nothing like that.
There's so much more richness here, so much more concentration. The other thing that it reminds me a little bit of is Nebbiolo. And when I say Nebbiolo, there's a couple of things that it reminds me of. This is the grape, Nebbiolo is the grape of Barolo and Barbaresco, Gattinara, which is a little more obscure. But that's a grape that's very high in acid. So the top of my tongue is salivating.
Yeah.
It's very high in tannin. The sides of my tongue are drying out a little bit. So acidity makes your mouth water. Tannin can sort of dry out your mouth a little bit. If you're having a wine with a great finish and then that finish just kind of clamps down, that's usually tannin in action.
Yep.
And tannin and acidity are both preservatives. They are part of what allow a wine to age really well, assuming everything is in harmony. So then it's almost like Nebbiolo in terms of that great acidity, that great tannic balance. But I don't think I've ever had a Nebbiolo that's anywhere near this fruit forward. This is a little darker, a little richer.
No.
But not heavy or ponderous by any stretch. That acidity just keeps everything really bright and just, I don't know that I'd say dances on the tongue. It's a little big for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it dances. No, but
maybe a pogo dances, little punk rock dancing there.
No, but it is on the nose. It's definitely Pinot Noir like, but you think it's bright, it's airy. You kind of expect that, and you taste it, and it's like, oh wait a minute, no, this is more structured, more layered. There's a lot more going on here than just with a basic red wine.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's something we should talk about a little bit. Is when you say a basic red wine, we're talking about things that are affordable, that are a Tuesday night wine, people's entry-level wines that you can actually find. It's going to get a little tougher to find some things for a while. The nice thing is the dollar's a little stronger compared to the euro than it was for a while, so that sort of helps bring down the price on European wines. But unfortunately, we're getting ready to go into what would have been the 2020 vintage for a lot of people, and there just won't be much, if any, wine, especially red wine. So California was hit really badly. I don't think you'll see a single red wine from the Santa Lucia Highlands. Napa, Sonoma, up into Oregon and Washington State, there's going to be a real shortage of wine in the 2020 vintage. And one of the things that means is a lot of wineries are raising their prices on the 18s and 19s just so they have the cash flow to survive missing a vintage. Imagine if Gomer's just wasn't open for a year. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, not having anything to sell for a year. And that's really tough, and we certainly want to do a great job for our partners in California, in Oregon, in Washington, and we will sell as much wine as we possibly can. But we've also gone to them and said, look, you have to take care of yourself. You make a little more money when you're doing direct to consumer. So if you need to do that for your wine club, things like that, please make sure you're in okay shape, that you survive. But it means that with the euro not being quite as strong compared to the dollar, or the dollar being stronger to the euro, whichever way you want to look at it, some of these European wines really become a great deal in comparison. I always think this is a great deal, but even more so now with the 2020 vintage sort of looming.
Yep. And I was talking with a customer in the store probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then we were talking about smoke taint. And from California and all of that, and that it's out there that there are some companies, wine conglomerates, and that buy bulk grapes, that they are buying these smoke tainted grapes, and they are making smoke taint to try and create a whole new marketing category. So I would be, to the consumer, just if you see that, just be very, very cautious of that, because though some wines do have this tobacco and the smokiness about them inherently because of what's put in the bottle, and are fantastic with some of your fall foods, this is completely different. This is not that type of smoke. This is way different, and I'm afraid that it might ruin some people. On some producers maybe going, oh, we need to make some money, let's do this, and all of a sudden their reputation starts to sour a little bit.
I don't know of any winery that, I don't think there's anybody we work with that has said we're going to bottle a red wine from an area where this was damaged. But not everybody lives up to those standards.
Right.
Now, we had a couple people that said we're going to do some trials, we're going to make some wine some red wine. And C, the Pisoni family, who had some real low elevation stuff, went, oh, the smoke's mostly hanging out higher. Let's see if we can make red wine from here. And they did, and to their eternal credit, they said, nope, we're not putting that in the bottle.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, the wines will be a little bit different than the last time we saw big smoke damage in California, which I think was 2006, mostly around Anderson Valley when there were big fires. And what happened then is the ash was actually sort of sitting on the grapes. That apparently didn't really happen this time, but the effects can be similar. What happened in I think it was 2006, 2007 is initially those wines had kind of this smoky characteristic on the nose, and it was almost kind of interesting. Oh, well, hey, it's a characteristic of the vintage. It's kind of interesting. Well, about 6 months later, those wines were like licking an ashtray.
Yeah.
Everything else was gone.
Just fell apart.
Yeah, so we've been really careful. For the most part, white wine grapes had been brought in, and probably grapes for rosés had been brought in. But the red wines that were still hanging out on the vines, those are the things that were damaged. So, blue chip producers like Chateau Montelena is making no red wine in 2020. That's first vintage ever. I mean, that's really staggering to think about. So, yeah, it's kind of tough. So, when you see 2020 reds, especially if you see something from Santa Lucia Highlands, Napa Valley, Willamette Valley,
be cautious.
Yeah, be cautious.
Be cautious.
We're tasting everything. They're producers where normally we'd be like, yeah, we'll just take our allocation, and now we're like, we want to taste a bottle. Not that we don't trust them, but because we do. I mean, the producers we work with, we trust, but we have to be able to go to somebody with absolute certainty. I have to be able to come to Pat. Pat has to be able to go to the consumer with absolute certainty and say, I stand behind this wine. And that's kind of why we're in your kitchen tasting these wines.
Tasting wines.
Anything that you are going to have your name on, anything I'm going to have my name on, we want to make sure that it's something we really stand behind. So with that, wine number 3.
Wine number 3. Now this is a Grand Cru.
So this is a cru wine.
Cru wine?
Yeah, so we should sort of talk about this. Cru is kind of, in this case, it's kind of shorthand. The word we should really be using is contrada. So if you talk about cru in Burgundy, we're talking about a hierarchy of wine, a Premier Cru vineyard or a Grand Cru vineyard, which is the best of the best. And those are vineyards where the government has said, this is a Grand Cru site, this is a Premier Cru site. The word can mean something a little bit different in Bordeaux, where the classifications get really weird depending on where you are. A Grand Cru in Saint-Emilion sounds great, but that's actually the third highest quality level, so it just depends on where you are. This probably is, it's more similar to Piedmont when we talk about Cru Barbarescos, Pie and Novello and things like that, Rio Sordo. In the case of Etna, we talked earlier a little bit about the fact that for the most part, people have always just kind of made wines and they've blended them from all over the place. There's a neat map that we're going to put a link to on the email, and we'll figure out how to put it at the end of this video as well, of this vineyard map of these contradas. And the reason that that's been important for growers is because they will own part of one of those places. So, you might say, oh, well, yeah, I own some vineyards in Santo Spirito, or, another area. So you have to sort of know where your vineyards are, and those are named. But for the most part, producers haven't labeled these as single parcel, single contrada wines, but that is starting to happen now. And as you see more people do that, then I think more people are going to become familiar with what each of these different crus taste like. So I know you've taken this bottle of wine home before. I've taken this fantastic home before. Yeah, this is kind of one of my favorite things to show people right now. We honestly don't have a lot of this. We're going to have a couple of 6-packs for the store maybe. There's not a ton of this to go around. This is going to be upper 30s, low 40s. I'd have to look at the price again on this. So probably not a Tuesday night wine for most folks. Certainly not for me, sadly. But still a tremendous value for what is in here. A couple weeks ago, I actually had a different cru wine from Terre Nere out, and the difference in the two of these was striking. So again, volcanic soils on the top, but the other wine was this really big, rich kind of powerhouse wine, which was really neat. But it was sort of what I was expecting when I tried the Santo Spirito. St. Louis, my St. Louis branch had some of these wines in their warehouse. I went, I want some of those, so brought them over and had fun showing them around. But the difference was really striking. So this wine, this is 2017 Santo Spirito, and this was a really hot year. This was, you're right, there's a lot of consistency in this area, but this was a warmer year, and getting really beautiful wine here was a little bit more of a challenge for Marco de Grazia and his team, which they nailed. But this wine, rather than being that big powerhouse, is so elegant.
Oh, just to say, this is elegant.
Yeah,
this is fantastic.
This wine just gets better and better too. I love this wine. One of the real differences here is this is a thin layer of very, very fine volcanic ash. So in some areas you'll get more coarse ash, you'll get volcanic rock, but Mark de Grazia says this looks like talcum powder if talcum powder were completely black, which is what the volcanic soil looks like. But the end result is this wine that just, I mean, it's weird to talk about Burgundy when you're talking about wine from Sicily, but it has that kind of Burgundian characteristic to it, or again, that kind of Nabiolo-ish vibe to it.
This is really good. If I remember when the Pinnacle, when you guys had your wine tour at the Kaufman Center a few years back, this was one of the showstoppers. This was one that a lot of customers that were able to attend that with us ordered and said, "Oh my gosh, this is fantastic."
So this needs about 3 more days to be open, or a couple hours into the canner. Put it in a blender and hit frappe. So yeah, this is just a wine with a ton of structure here. So the fact that it is as elegant as it is already, because I pulled the cork when I got here and poured the wine in the glass 20 minutes ago now, whatever it is. And this wine is already singing, but having had this wine open for a couple days in the market previous times, I know how good this wine gets, and I know you've enjoyed it over the course of an evening.
Oh, it's fantastic. It is a great, great wine. We went to an Italian restaurant in town, not last summer, the summer before. Some friends of ours came in from California, so we went down there on a Sunday, and where they waived the corkage fees at this particular place, and we walked in with this, and our waiter looked at it, he saw the vintage, and he goes, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "Well, and he goes, "I want a little bit of that." So he brought his own glass out, and he poured himself a little bit, and he poured all of our glasses, but it was just fantastic.
Nice.
Oh my gosh, just a fantastic bottle of wine.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So this is almost all Nerello Mascalese. So I was thinking about it's 80% that you have to do to be an Etna Rosso. It has to be at least 80% Nerello Mascalese. This is 98% Nerello Mascalese and 2% Nerello Cucuccio from a really special site. The 18 vintage of this, I think, is coming in pretty soon. About 18 or maybe 19, I can't remember. These are really small production wine. They're just wines. There's not a lot made of these. You can find the Etna Bianco and the Rosso most of the time. And we direct import these wines at Pinnacle Imports. That's the company I work for, Pinnacle Imports. And a lot of times what we will do with imported wines is, rather than buying from another importer who's already brought the wines in on the coast, we fill up a container of wine in Italy or France or Germany or New Zealand, wherever it is, Spain's a big one, and we have those wines brought over ourselves. The wines are temperature controlled the entire time, from the time they leave the winery to the time they land at Gomer's shelves. So that's a really important thing for us. We can absolutely guarantee the quality of the wines, but it also makes the wines more affordable. We're not paying another importer, so you're kind of getting rid of one of the middlemen. We essentially kind of are the importer when we're direct importing wines. So it gives us access to more of the wine than if it went to another importer, and then we just had to try and, "Please, sir, maybe we have some scraps." So we get, maybe 10 6-packs of this wine came to Missouri, something like that. There wasn't a ton of it. So there are times when I'm out of the Etna Rosso for maybe a few weeks at a time waiting on a container. But by and large, you can find those. The cru wines, those are harder to find, and especially with the kind of press they get. This was 96 points for 96 spirits for this one.
This is fantastic.
For just a really, really lovely one.
It's great. Very, very cool. Very cool. Anything else we need to cover for the folks on these? Or?
No, we'll see you again soon. I think we're going to knock out Tuscany and Piedmont for the next two videos, and then probably concentrate on Burgundy as well. If you're watching this around the time that we're recording it, you will see an email with an offering with the wines with the pricing, as well as a link to the vineyard map, which I think is really, really cool. I love maps. And Pat will have these in the store, so if he happens to run out, I got a little more for him. We can get him taken care of as well. So thank you very much for watching the Gomers video channel, and Pat and I will see you soon.
Yep, you got it. Thank you guys. Appreciate
Cheers.
it. Thanks for staying with us.